All right. Good lunchtime to Sweden and good afternoon to Brazil. Welcome to this webinar brought to you by BRASFI and Susas from Stockholm University. Today on this webinar, we will be discussing the Amazon rainforest, the involvement of financial sector, and risks and opportunities of the future. Discussing with us, we have Dr. and researcher Beatrice Krona from Stockholm Resilience Center. Welcome. And Marisol Guez from Amazon Bioeconomy Hub. Welcome. And I will be your host today. My name is Börje Järvinen. Hello. I'm currently a student at Stockholm University and I'm board member of Stockholm University Student Association for Sustainability, aka SUSAS. Please be noted that this session will be recorded and published on BRASFI's YouTube channel for later viewing. And a short disclaimer, panelists and we have agreed to share our voices and words on this recording. And on the behalf of SUSAS, also I would like to thank BRASFI, Bioeconomy Hub, and Stockholm Resilience Center for making this webinar possible. And lastly, some house rules for this webinar. We have a short of an hour time to discuss. I will be presenting questions to our panelists and checking the clock so that we stay in time. And in the end, we might have a short Q&A depending on how good we do with the time from the audience. All right, but without further ado, let us start. For each question, we have approximately 7 to 9 minutes reserved, and the first one goes to you, Beatrice. We start on a quite broad perspective. So on like a global scale, what is the role of Amazon rainforest when it comes to climate change?
So the Amazon rainforest, I think you often, or maybe not so often anymore, but you used to hear that the Amazon is the lungs of the world. I think that is slightly misleading. I think actually what the Amazonian forest does for the global climate is that it's critical in the carbon cycle. And everyone knows that the climate change, the big driver of that is an excess of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Now, the Amazon is one of several of these kind of what scientists have called tipping elements. So parts, regions of the world that are, their dynamic could potentially tip into something else. And for the Amazon, it's about the fact that, it's a rainforest. It has a huge amount of carbon stored in the biomass of the trees and all the organic material. And the trees breathe, and as they do that, they recycle the rain, and means that basically it sort of sustains itself as a rainforest, and it stores a lot of carbon in the above ground biomass, which by that I mean trees, but also in the soil, huge amounts. Now, what's happening is that we call them tipping elements because, as I said, they have this potential to tip into what? Well, so for the Amazon, it's about that it could tip into a savanna, which is a much, much drier ecosystem, which doesn't contain nearly as much biomass, so it doesn't store as much. It's much drier and it burns more frequently. So the problem is we really don't want the Amazon to tip, because if it would, then it would have this effect of releasing vast amounts of carbons into the atmosphere just at the moment when we really want to store as much carbon as possible and suck it out of the atmosphere. So we talk about carbon sinks and carbon sources, and right now the Amazon is a huge carbon sink, but it is approaching a point where it might tip into becoming a carbon source. So that's maybe more than you wanted, but that's how I would explain the value of the Amazonian rainforest from a climate perspective. Of course, there's biodiversity and all kinds of other aspects as well.
All right, thank you. So, very important point on our planet. All right, next one goes to you, Marisol. Could you please share with us your thoughts about the importance of Amazon rainforest on a regional scale? Now we talked about the global scale, but how about the regional one?
Thank you, Pierre. First of all, it's a great honor to be here in this event and to discuss such relevant issues for the future of the Amazon as international cooperation, financial mechanisms, adherence to our reality here in the region. I would like to thank BRASFI for the invitation. And it's great to hear Beatrice and meet someone from Sweden who knows so much about Amazon. Just a quick introduction, the Amazon Bioeconomy Hub is an alliance between Foundation for Amazon Sustainability and Green Economy Coalition. And in the past 14 years, FAS, alongside its partners, has been developing solutions that demonstrate that a green and inclusive economy is possible in the Amazon. And I would like to share with you all a short video. Is it possible, Pierre, if we can just share? It's a 2-minute video. This would save some time explaining our role here in what we've been doing in Brazil in this theme.
Absolutely. I would just ask our technical team to, yes, oh, here we go.
Thank you, Pierre. Responding your question about the importance of the Amazon rainforest on a regional scale, as Beatrice mentioned, Amazon is key for the carbon cycle, and our video already answered part of your question, Piri, but I would like just to emphasize that the Amazon is the largest and most bioculture diverse ecosystem on Earth. The Amazon biome covers 8 countries. Normally, people tend to mention that the Amazon is connecting more to Brazil, but the biome covers 8 countries, 1 province, Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, Guyana, Peru, Suriname, Venezuela. And it's important also to mention the human dimension of the Amazon. In this region, there are more than 40 millions of people, including almost 400 indigenous ethnical communities. So when we refer to Brazilian legal Amazon, it represents 60% of our national territory. It's more than half part of our territory, and also comprises 9 Brazilian states. So it's a very significant portion of our territory. And there is and mentioning Brazil, there is a regional plurality and diversity of not just landscapes, but also productive vocations. Each state has tended to have its own vocation, either for acai, other to Brazil nuts, handcrafts. So we have these particularities, regionally particularities, which makes this very challenging when we come into policies, national, regional, or international policies. When we mention and when we work with the Amazon region. And also, as our video shows, we have a urban Amazon with large urban centers, because also, once again, when we tend to mention about the Amazon, we connect with the ecosystem, but we forget that the Amazon, we also have important urban centers which face problems that urban cities face. So, and also we have a remote, a rural Amazon, when sometimes it takes 7 days to go by boat and 7 days to come back by boat. I would like to mention a city, call it São Gabriel da Cachoeira. From Manaus, which is the city, the capital of the Amazonas, we take 7 days to go by boat and 7 days to go back to Manaus. So just to visit São Gabriel da Cachoeira, if we go by boat, we take like 14 days, it's half month just to go and back, just to have an idea about the dimension and the distance when we mention about the Amazon. And as mentioned by Beatriz, the Amazon is a very important asset for the future, not only of Brazil, but the planet, capable of providing us fundamental ecosystem services. And it's also important to mention, if we do not have the Amazon standing, we will not have the rainfall regime that fits the Brazilian agriculture production, which is one of the main segments of our economy. If we do not have the Amazon standing, we do not have the rainfall regime, the generation of hydroelectricity in our dams, which will affect the supply of water for the urban consumption, also affected. So the Amazon is an interconnected issue which affects not Brazil, the planet as a whole, but we already see the effects in Brazil with the rainfall regime, and we can discuss this further during this event. This is one of the reasons that the Amazon, it's not just an environmental issue in Brazil, but it's already started to become an agenda into the Ministry of Economy in Brazil. So because of this transversal impact and effects in our day-to-day life.
All right, thank you so much, Marisol. About the economy, the next question goes to you, Beatrice. Listening to this, what do you think about when we talk about the threats, for example, the deforestation? Is there some way finance sector has tangled itself to this phenomena, and if so, how? Yeah.
So you mean how finance is linked to it?
Yes.
Yeah,
That's a better wording.
So I mean, yeah, the research that I've been leading together with other colleagues at Stockholm Resilience Center and the Royal Academy of Science actually was, well, it started, let me just say, because of the situation with deforestation that we were witnessing. And we know that like prior to 2008, and Marisol can probably speak to this better than me, but we saw rampant deforestation happening. And then we had the forest code come into effect. We saw a tightening of the environmental policy and regulation. We saw a slowing down on deforestation rates, which sadly have then again massively increased in recent years. And and also forest fires linked to this. And so that's what triggered us to start the research, where we thought, well, okay, what is another lever by which we can use to try and halt this really negative trend? And as sustainability scientists, we felt like, well, and the finance is, for us, has been a blind spot. It has been a sector that we have not really engaged with. But when regulation is failing for various reasons, political will is failing, and you look to other kind of powerful sectors to help. And finance contributes all the investments, and well, so investments through debt, or rather through the credit that they provide to companies that operate in various ways but like that have an effect on what happens in the Amazon, but also ownership, right? So you can think of the financial industry in two ways. One is they provide the loans to the companies, and the other one is they own shares in the companies. And that's two key ways that the financial sector itself is directly linked to the Amazon, because it owns shares and it provides loans to the large traders that effectively, you could say, drive a lot of the deforestation that we are seeing, because they are trading in grain, soya particularly, and beef and mining. Well, they're not trading in mining, they're invested in mining. And those are three primary threats in the Amazon. It's not the only ones, but they're the three really big ones. And so that's why you could argue that looking at the financial sector and getting the financial sector involved in thinking about this is potentially a powerful tool to halt this. We can maybe get back to how well that's been working, but that is how, as I see it, the link to the financial capital markets, if you will.
Very interesting. And do we talk, well, ownership and finance trades, I bet, are not easy subjects to do research about, but what's your view, like, are these, well, I guess, global finance flows, or where does the money come from and to whom, if?
Yes, so I mean, our work had, so we can say that loans is very hard for us as researchers to say anything about. It's a very opaque system where banks will not freely give out data on who they are loaning to or how much. So that is actually, in general, to the research community, a very difficult thing to study. Yet I would say that bank loans is probably much, much more important in fueling the operations of companies anywhere in the world, and therefore has a much tighter link potentially to detrimental negative environmental impacts. So anything we can do to get sustainability criteria into the covenants that are linked to the loans would be, fantastic, but it's hard to do research on it. So many of us are then left to studying basically ownership through equity or shares in companies. And that's, again, what we have been doing. So we ended up making a link between some of the large institutional investors, which are either various funds through banks, but particularly pension funds and mutual funds. And we saw that even Sweden's pension funds are strongly linked to the Amazon through, it was particularly beef and mining. And we were, as a result of that, got involved with a lot of discussions with the ethical council of the AP funds in Sweden. And they have done a lot to try and engage with the boards of many of the top, in terms of market cap companies in the Amazon. But as I said, from a personal perspective, after having been involved in studying this now and understanding the financial sector more and more, I'd say that ownership and therefore engage, so pension funds who are, they own shares in companies, they can't really divest because their whole business model is to invest very, very broadly to have a very effectively mirror the entire market, which means that they have difficulty divesting. And it means what their sort of method of change is to say, no, let's engage with the boards of these companies. The problem is that I know for a fact that the ethical council tried to engage with Vale in the mining, but also in JBS and some of the other big Brazilian meat packing and meat, traders, without a huge amount of luck. And then the question is like, what do you do then? Do you stay in or do you divest? And if you divest, the problem is that on a global capital market, there are going to be other investors who are willing to step in, who have less scruples. So, to think that you can kind of strangle the investment into these companies is unfortunately it's not really happening. That's why I've more and more tended towards like, we need to get to the loans and the credit and the covenants that are linked to the loans, because working merely through ownership is not really, as I see it, working fast enough.
Alarming, but very informing. Thank you. All right, now we talked about these problems and threats we face. But if we could maybe move on to possible solutions and prospects. So the next one goes to Marisol. What projects have been developed to support or supported by the Bioeconomy Hub to tackle the deforestation that is a very large problem as it has been come out in this discussion in the Amazon rainforest?
Yes, Piri, overcoming problems such as deforestation, illegal mining, illegal occupation on public lands in the Amazon, it involves a systemic and integrated approach with multiple actors. As Beatrice mentioned, the challenge of international organizations better understanding or having a feet on the ground, comprehending, understanding the realities, limitations for this international investment have the impact that the populations mainly need on the field. So it's not possible to look at only one dimension when it comes to the Amazon. And in this sense, the Amazon Bioeconomy Hub has been articulating, connecting, and catalyzing solutions, especially into 5 main strategic axes that we believe are the most key in order to overcome the challenges we have in the Amazon. The first one is generation of knowledge, data, metrics. As Beatrice mentioned, the importance of having studies and generating intelligence that not just financial institutions in Brazil, but also abroad can better understand the value chains in Brazil, the promising ones, where the investment can be more strategic and with higher impact. And this needs studies, not just studies, but technical cooperation, generation of knowledge. And we work in cooperation with other institutions, national, regional, and global ones, generating this type of data and metrics on the Amazonian bioeconomy, let's say. The second one, which we believe is very important and key, knowledge, only knowledge is not sufficient when we mention about Amazon. Building local capacity, human capital formation is very strategic and important. Helping build community resilience, developing leaderships, local leaderships is critical and very key to tackle the deforestation. And we have an eye, and very important eye, and especially FAS with its partners has been developing the past 14 years, working a lot on building capacity and building leaderships on the field. The third one is articulation, because we have many solutions, Amazon solutions, that already are working on the field, but they struggle to connect to one another. So having this connection And we, in the past years, we have seen in the Amazon important movements. Consultation for the Amazon is one of them, which convene multiple actors. Brazilian coalitions for agriculture and businesses is another movement, very important one at national level. So these movements are important because they provide intersectorial articulations to create this space for better dialogue and concrete actions when we mention about Amazon. The fourth one, which we must mention, is strengthening efficient regional public policy mechanisms. We lack the federal government. When we mention about federal government, we all know, I believe, that we face a huge challenge nowadays in Brazil, and the subnational and local governors, they play a key role on tackling the deforestation. And I believe we have the chance to discuss the importance of international cooperation to better support local governors, subnational governors in the Amazon to track deforestation. And this, we already have many signs of very positive partnerships in terms of this international cooperation. Fundo Amazonia is one of them. Unfortunately, it's stopped at the moment, but it's involving Norway, Germany, and other very important countries that have already a decent reputation working with the Amazon the past years. And this is very important. Strength public policy mechanisms at regional level. When I mention regional level, I mention the Brazilian legal Amazon, the states that I have mentioned before. And the last one is promoting a better environment for new financial mechanisms that comprehend, that better understand our reality. And the past 3 years, we have different mechanisms. I can mention blended finance is one of them that is better understanding that in Amazon, we mention when we work in the Amazon, it's about long-term projects. It's not just like a punctual projects, it's programming that it takes long time to start having a result. And investor, they play a very important role on better understanding these particularities. And I would like to mention that we have seen in Brazil, and I would like to highlight in our discussion, the influence of investors, banks, and multilateral organizations in the Amazon, because they have been playing a very relevant, especially the role of the international investors, that when they signalize that we are going to stop investing in Brazil, stop investing in companies related to deforestation, this is a very strong signal that the market picked it up and made the agenda of deforestation in Brazil leave only the Ministry of Environment and start become an agenda of the Ministry of Economy. So the pressure of international organizations making this type of pressure, this is very important because this has been made in Brazil, that the Amazon start becoming an agenda, not just connected with the environmental ministry, as I mentioned, but also other transversal agenda in the ministries at federal level. So the banks, they have played a very relevant role with the formulations of a letter of commitment. I must mention the 3 major banks in Brazil, Bradesco, Itaú, Santander, they joined a plan. This is non-precedent. We have not seen this before in Brazil. And they have point out very critical and political sign that the business world represented by financial system has a key eye for the Amazon issue. So this type of pressure is very important and also unprecedented in Brazil the past 2 years.
Right. If you don't mind continuing on that thought a little bit, you mentioned the international cooperation and the importance of it and the pressure. What about based on the hub experience? Who are the big international organizations on the ground? You mentioned a couple of local ones, but what about the international ones? And what is their role locally?
International cooperation plays a fundamental role in the Amazon. And this role is especially relevant for state and municipal governments because the subnational local governments are very important to the environmental agenda in Brazil. And I can better explain that. It's important to mention that often the environmental agenda in Brazil is very much tied to the federal governments, especially the narrative internationally. We all know that we are facing a very critical and political moment in Brazil, and the deforestation is very connected with the performance at federal level. But what we do not mention much is the play and the role at subnational level. And now I would like to emphasize this in our discussion, because the international cooperation is very, very important. And we have already seen in the first decade of this center, the reduction of deforestation that occurred was especially happened because of the incentives of international cooperation joining with local governors in the Amazon, at state, at municipal governments. So, and that's why this cooperation between subnational and international, at local and global institutional, without the of course, federal plays and must play and should play a very important role. But in this scenario that we face, when we lack the protagonism of federal government, we have a protagonism of subnational and local governors with very close cooperation, which, as I mentioned before, with German, United States, there's the USA, very important role the past decade in the Amazon, and Norway with the Amazon Fund, Fundo Amazonia, which we already have studies and results that mention the importance of this program to reduce deforestation and generate economic alternatives for local communities in the Amazon. So, and of course, we have in the past years the LEAF and other mechanisms, financial mechanisms that it's starting in the European Commission and that has been impacting very favorable this in Brazil. Especially the hub, the Amazon Bioeconomy Hub. We are a network that it's a result. It comes from international cooperation, connecting with the hubs from the Green Economy Coalition, one of the major green economy movements in the world. So they, just to be very clear, the international cooperation has a fundamental role in attracting the attention of governors and strengthening the bodies responsible for the environmental agenda. And there is a very long story of this in Brazil.
All right. What about finance? Has that helped you get funding, and how does that play out when it comes to international cooperation and your projects with the hub?
Yes, as I mentioned before, the finance sector, they have this very important role on one hand, making pressure, because we have seen the impacts of the pressure, the international pressure, and now the federal government knows that they cannot do whatever they want, in other words. So there is this pressure with economic impacts in the major businesses, companies in and outside Brazil. So so on one hand, this finance sector play this very important role on making this type of pressure. But on the other hand, I would like to mention, and we tend to mention this within FAS, we must Amazonize the financial sector in order to the financial sector better understand what the Amazon truly is, the challenges, the bottlenecks, and the timing, because we know that timing is key for investors, and timing is an issue in the Amazon, because Amazon, as I mentioned before in our when we start our speech, it's long distance. We have challenges, logistic, distribution issues. So it's very challenging, this part. So the financial sector, in my point of view, must to get closer to this reality. And when I mention this to the financial sector in Brazil as well, because we have in the south of Brazil a major center called Faria Lima, Avenida Paulista in São Paulo, and we mentioned that the importance of these main centers, financial centers, to get closer to the Amazon. Even in the same Brazil, we face the challenge that sometimes the Amazon, it seems something very far from the reality of Brazilians. And the exercise here is to better explain how the things are connected, and how is important we better understand this reality in order to implement, to generate solutions, to co-create solutions that in certain areas would work perfectly fine, but when it comes to the Amazon, when we better understand that the streets in the Amazons are rivers in many cases, it changes the perspective. So this sensibility in better understand this reality, and understanding that investments in the Amazon must be more patient, long-term. It's not like a short-term. This is very key for investors. So, and I think just to summarize, these organizations, they have played a very important role. But I do believe that still we need adaptations. We need a movement on also better understand these instruments and the bureaucracy of these instruments, especially international instruments, when they want to work with the Amazon and programs in the regions. Because we have many international organizations that are very bureaucratic, and it's very necessary also put pressure on these organisms in order for us to work on long term and in a successful way as well.
Great, thank you, Marisol, for that. I'm wondering, Beatrice, you already mentioned the involvement of or the role of, for example, Swedish pension funds that invest in the operations, if we want to call them that, for example, contribute to deforestation. But And you already bit answered to this question, but okay, so the ownership and looking to that and putting the pressure on that because of the global capital doesn't seem to work. But do you see what opportunities could be done from Swedish perspective or Western perspective in general to help the situation or to redirect the financial flows away from these harmful practices?
So I think there's multiple things, and none of them are going to come, like easily. But we have to work on multiple fronts. And I think Marisol has already spoken about, the importance of just signaling, even from just the focus of financial institutions and them asking questions and putting pressure, sends a signal also to the Brazilian government that this is no longer just an environmental agency question. It actually goes up to the Ministry of Finance. So that's, that symbolic signal is important. But I think from a really instrumental perspective, what can be done is several things. One is to continue, as I said, I don't think we should just oh no, we shouldn't worry about board engagement because it's not leading anywhere. Some companies will notoriously not care, and they will just trust that, okay, some more conscientious institutional investors in the UK, for example, with the Deforestation Act of the UK, which is a very strong signal. Things like that will start to come in Europe, and they will just go like, whatever, we'll get Chinese investors instead. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't continue to do it. So I think, yes, we continue on that track and we ramp it up. The other thing is, as I already talked about, is that we need to, researchers, everyone needs to say it's not just about the equity side of things. We need to point the torch much more at banks as well. And in that I include development banks, for them to be much more on the ball when it comes to sustainability criteria for the kinds of loans that they give out, recognizing the important role of Amazon, not just for Brazil, but of course for Brazil. So for Brazilian development banks, this should be a no-brainer, but also for international development banks, but also commercial banks. So that's the other thing, getting it into the debt credit sector. It is creeping in there for sure, but it's slow, and it's mostly, some more conscientious banks in, I would say, Europe. The US is lagging a lot. And the other thing is, which is another thing we've been trying to look at from my group, is the fact that it's not just direct investments. It's actually about the tax, or if I could talk about it broadly, like financial secrecy and tax avoidance, which tax avoidance can be very large. There's many things, but one is, for example, just basically using offshore jurisdictions or tax havens to funnel funds, for example. And what that means is that companies who are able to do that a lot benefit financially, because they end up basically having less costs, right? They're paying less tax. We find a lot of that happening among the companies who are also closely associated with deforestation in the Amazon. So this is about, financial secrecy generally. Can we be allowed to have these kinds of tax havens where people can not only, launder money and avoid tax, but also obscure ownership? So to me, this goes beyond the Amazon, but it is also really important for the Amazon. The problem from our perspective as researchers is that it's very, very hard to prove that the financial secrecy and the benefits that these companies are receiving can be directly linked to deforestation. We can't prove it. We don't have the smoking gun, but putting 2 and 2 and 3 together, we can definitely see that that is part of why they can continue to operate with large profit margins. So yeah, those are different things. These are all areas, and as I said, they're not easy to address, but I think we need to work on all of those aspects, or flag them up as being important.
Thank you. Well, not easy, but most definitely very necessary if we are to survive on this planet. I think everybody on this panel would agree on that. All right. But back to Marisol, considering the ongoing projects in Amazon, what could be expected in the medium and long term? We've been talking broadly, we've been talking locally from different perspectives, but what can be expected in the future in medium and bit longer term? What lies ahead from your perspective?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, priorities for a future agenda. It's very important that we have a systemic approach, as mentioned before, not just looking at one dimension, at one solution. What we've been trying in the field with many other organizations is trying to develop this systemic approach, which seems the education, health, infrastructure, renewable energy, empowerment, leaderships, environmental conservation, technical innovations as key and important role in progressing this agenda, and not just in Brazil, but in Pan-Amazon, in the Amazon basin as a whole. And looking at all these fronts is essential, and bringing the protagonisms and the needs of those who live the reality, who face the challenges, especially traditional populations, indigenous groups. The protagonism of these populations are very important, are very challenging. And yesterday, I think it's important to mention that we have the International Protagonism Day for indigenous populations here in Brazil, and we know the challenges that they are facing, especially in the past years of federal government here in Brazil. So I do believe that setting priorities is key, but working in a systemic approach is also very, very important, and considering the particularities, not considering Amazon as a monoblock and a huge monoblock. As I mentioned before, we have the Brazilian Amazon, we have the Pan-Amazon with other countries. In each country has its own particularities. And in Brazil, when we mention about Brazil, it's more than 60% of our territory. And in this magnitude, we have very particularities in each state of Brazil. So, I do believe working in financial instruments that are more and that are understanding our reality, but connecting to that, developing also an environment where we have more strong institutional, and I believe that international cooperation is very important, because we have in the past 10 years, the organizations, the local organizations which work with and for Amazon, they could innovate because we have received possibilities, funds, and opportunities to do that. So developing an institutional environment, which is very challenging at the moment we are living, especially the past 3 years in the environmental agenda in Brazil. So having this cooperation now, this support on progressing, and not just trying to avoid backing step back, because this is also important to mention, most of our energy the past years are working on stopping going back. And now we do believe, and this is connecting with the final questions about final thoughts, is that we do believe, and we are in a very critical moment here in Brazil, especially, where we have the chance of progress on looking forward, looking to the future, because the past years were very intense, were very difficult for people and environmentalists and organizations and financial sector, international cooperation that works with Amazon on trying to avoid going too much step back on this agenda, and we do believe that the Amazon agenda is the most important internationally agenda for Brazil. It's capable of closing doors for Brazil, but it's also capable of opening doors for Brazil. And these strategic visions should guide not only Brazilian foreign policy, but the positioning of all segments of Brazil, international, institutional, financial sector as well. And we need to demonstrate very clearly that we know how to take care of the Amazon, and it's important to distinguish between what are temporary governments and the will of a nation. And I believe that this year, which is an electoral year, it will be very key. And we already have studies that prove that the Amazon will define elections in Brazil this year. And we do believe that the future, we know that it's not only depending on politics, but this is very important segment and very important role in Brazil. And yes, and we need to look at the Amazon as a very important asset for the future of Brazil, capable of offering fundamental ecosystem services, as I mentioned before. And I believe that this is the message.
Thank you. Yes, all right. We are soon closing in on our ending time, but before we conclude this webinar, I would like to ask if you have any final thoughts or final remarks. Marisol, you already went into a little bit of this area, but Beatrice, do you have some concluding remarks you would like to leave to audience after this discussion?
No, I don't think so. I think just maybe say thanks for inviting me. And I think it's, I was going to say nice, but it's perhaps the wrong word, but it is good to see that both of the financial aspects, so the role of the financial sector is increasingly being discussed. It wasn't really at all 7 years ago when we started our work. Suddenly it is in the sort of discussions a lot on in terms of what they can do to make things better. And I think what was I going to say? I lost my other thoughts, but anyway, yeah, thanks for inviting me, and it's been really interesting to listen to Marisol as well.
Thank you very much. And Marisol, do you have some final thoughts and concluding remarks before we quit?
Yes, thank you, Pierre. Thank you all. It was a great pleasure to meet Beatriz, who knows so much well about the Amazon. I hope we can chat and continue possibilities of cooperating between our institutions as well. And I would like to complement and reinforce what Beatriz last mentioned now, because despite all the scenario we are facing, I believe we have many reasons to have hope and active hope in Brazil and those who work with the Amazon, despite all the critical scenario, the rates of deforestation increasing so high in a very exponential way. We do have actors, we do have a movement of financial institutions, international cooperation, multilateral organizations that are putting these very important subjects and discussions on the table. And we have seen this. We have never seen this cooperation between the major banks in Brazil. We have never seen the most important company and private sector movements organizing so much well here in Brazil to make pressure and to change the path when it's still there's time. We all know that the Amazon Science Panel mentioned that we are almost reaching the turning point, and we do not have time. We are in a very urgent moment. So the call to action here is to continue this work, to continue organizing this type of discussions. I would like to thank BRASFI, SUSAS, Stockholm University, and all the institutions involved in this webinar, because it's very important to mention the gaps, to mention the problems, but also to mention and highlight the possibilities and the progress that we all together we've been doing in this agenda. So I'd like to thank once again you all for this opportunity, and also invite you all to better know the work, the Amazon, just Googling the Amazon Bioeconomy Hub, and you can see more about how to get involved and how to engage in this initiative on the ground. Thank you so much again.
Thank you very much on my behalf as well. I've been learning a lot of new stuff today, and I hope our audience has also enjoyed this very informative discussion. So thank you both again for attending this webinar. It was a pleasure. Thank you, BRASFI, and my thanks from SUSAS as well. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.